Thank you. Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses is giving one of his last messages to the people of Israel before they cross over the Jordan River and go into this land that God had promised them. And one of the key themes of this message, and actually the subsequent messages that Moses gave to the people, was to remember. He says, remember the day. Remember the day when God spoke to you. Remember the day when God worked miracles before you. You saw with your own eyes, he said, God's faithfulness and his mercy and goodness to you. And I think certainly that's been a challenge to me to continue to remember God's work in my life and in our midst. And I believe we need that. We need to take time to remember and to reflect, because in that memory, we often find strength and encouragement for the day and for the days ahead. Just 2 days ago, on the 29th of March, we had a little time of remembrance on board the Logos Hope over in Scheveningen. And I don't know how to say that word, but yeah, thank you. And it was a special day because on the 29th of March, 5 years ago, we signed the agreement to purchase a ship called the Nerona, which is today the Logos Hope. And on that day, 29th of March 2004, that was a day when, in one sense, OM Ships and OM took a huge step of faith. We went into the unknown, trusting that God had led us to this ship, and this was going to be his ship for the ministry that he had in mind for us. And very soon, I imagine all of you are going to step on board the Logos Hope very shortly. She's just arrived a couple of hours ago in Edinburgh. So that was a very special day for us, and I want to tell you the story of how we came to that day. I could start a long time ago, but I want to start in September 2001. 10th of September 2001 was the day in which we officially launched the Logos Hope project. We had a special commissioning service in a church in London. There's a few of us that were there, and we announced that we're starting this project. At that time it was called, I think, the New Ship Project. Later on became the Next Ship Project, and then finally became the Logos Hope Project. But we launched this project, and we launched it without any money, without any people, without a plan, and without a ship. And in many ways it was like, it's OM, just stepping out of the unknown. Huge step of faith or presumption, depending on your perspective at the time. But we sensed that this was the time to start this project to replace our vessels. Very soon after that, we did begin to receive some money. In fact, we got the largest single gift that OM had ever received very shortly after that. We started to see people come to join the project. I was one of those, and Johannes Thompson and a few others. There was a plan that started to come together. At the beginning, it was, of course, something you could write on the back of a postage stamp. But pretty soon, it developed into many folders of documents as we started to think about what we needed to do and how we would go about replacing one of our ships and searching for another ship. But of course, we did not have a ship. At that time, we were somewhat innocent. It's easy to say that now, and I think some of you probably guessed that before we did. But we were somewhat innocent as we launched this project. We thought it wouldn't take too long at all. This was 2001, so initially we thought maybe 3 years, perhaps 4 at the latest, we would have found a ship, purchased it, outfitted it, and it would be ready for service. But soon after we started the project, I was part of this project team, and we were actually reading through the Exodus, the story of the Exodus. And the Logos Hope project for all of us became, like the Exodus, a great adventure of faith. Over the years, I've learned many lessons again about faith, what really is faith, and how can we walk by faith? How do we live by faith? How do we exercise faith? And of course, the whole project was just pregnant with opportunities to learn these lessons. But one of the passages we read was in Exodus 13. And it says here, as the people were leaving Egypt. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. And as we reflected upon that, certainly not too long after that, we realized that this project was not going to be short at all. There was a short way, but we began to see the project was actually going to take some time. Now, even when we read this verse and reflected on it, we still didn't think it would take until 2009. But God was speaking to us even in those early days, and I look back and I just hear the voice of the Lord so clearly. This project is going to take a while, and it's not because you necessarily are doing anything wrong, but God wants to strengthen us. He wants to help us to grow in our faith and in our ministry. Of course, there were setbacks in the project, and there were mistakes that we made, but always God was there. Always in His grace and His mercy, He was leading us forward. Now, I want to read another passage that comes shortly after that, and then you won't understand this passage, but I'll come back to it and you will understand. So the people of Israel are leaving Egypt. God's just delivered them. They're moving out, and they go by the desert road toward the Red Sea. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them. And they said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Now, if you can just hold that picture for about 15 minutes, we'll come back to that. As I said before, when we started the project, we were somewhat innocent. We didn't have a lot of money. Money was starting to come in. We didn't have many people, but slowly people began to join the project. The plan was building, but the main emphasis was to find the ship. And so we began to pray, obviously, that God would lead us to the right ship. But our prayer wasn't just that. I think in God's grace and in His just in a wonderful way, He led us to pray a slightly different prayer. Lord, lead us to the right ship at the right time. And I remember being in a prayer meeting every day where we prayed that prayer. Of course, we prayed other things as well. But always, Lord, lead us to the right ship at the right time. God began to reveal, certainly to me, that a lot of knowing His will is not so much is not only about the content, but also about the timing. And certainly we've discovered that over and over again in the Logos Hope Project. God works at a specific time to achieve His purposes. Many times in the project, it seemed at the very last moment that we see God's wonderful miracle mercy. But His timing was always perfect. And it would take all night to tell you of those many stories. But there are just incredible stories of God working, a phrase that we often used, in the nick of time. Psalm 107 talks about how God rescues His people in the nick of time. I used to say to the Lord, why does it have to be at the last possible moment? Why couldn't it be, 2 or 3 nicks before the last nick of time? But, that's how God was working with us. So we began to pray, Lord, lead us to the right ship at the right time. Johannes Thompson was our chief engineer for the project. And, of course, he was gathering information about various ships. We were in contact with ship brokers. We got drawings of ships. We began to make contact with ship owners. We visited a few ships. And then in August 2003, we decided that we wanted to visit a ship called the Nerona. The Nerona was a roll-on, roll-off passenger ship that sailed between Denmark and Iceland and the Faroe Islands. And the church in the Faroe Islands wrote to us and said, this ship is up for sale. You should think about visiting the Nerona. You should think about buying the Nerona. It's a perfect ship for you all, for OM. This could be God's next ship. In fact, we believe it is God's next ship. You just have to believe it too. Something like that, they said to us. So we gathered information about the Nerona. It had been laid up for a year. And then in August 2003, Johannes Thompson and I decided we'll go and visit the Nerona. So we went up to Denmark, and we spent all day going through this ship called the Nerona, which today is the Logos Hope. And as we went through all the decks and looked at all the spaces, I was, of course, more interested in some of the community and ministry spaces. Johannes was more interested in the machinery and how that all looked, etc. After the end of that day, we'd been 6 or 7 hours on board. We left the ship, walked down the gangway, got in our car and started driving. And I looked across at Johannes and I said, well, what do you think, Johannes? And of course, we hadn't really talked with each other. We were gathering notes, etc., but not really evaluated our visit. And cautiously, over the space of about 20 miles, we began to be more open with each other. And we came to the conclusion that the Nerona was not the ship for us. It was not the ship for several reasons, but really for one main reason, and that was that a lot of the ceiling, the deckheads and the bulkheads, the walls, were made out of an asbestos-based material. And that's what we didn't want. We didn't want to buy a ship that had asbestos on it, because we know ourselves, we buy a ship, we like to tinker, we like to change things, and the last thing we wanted was to work with asbestos. So we said, this is not the ship for us. By the way, since you know the rest of the story, let me also add a little parenthesis. All the asbestos has been removed from the Nerona or Logos Hope, so you can freely and confidently and safely go and visit the ship. But we said this is not the ship for us, and so we continued to look at different other ships, and we continued to visit ships on the market, mostly in Europe, and we gathered drawings from these vessels. While this is happening, of course, we're having many discussions ourselves. What we'd really like to have on board the ship? How many beds? What kind of ministry spaces would we like to have? And we actually had a drawing. We used ship drawings to have our discussion and bring forward a concept for ministry. Around about September, October 2003, we began to use the Nerona drawings more often than any other ship. It just seemed to be the right size and had the right number of spaces, etc. And so we often, when we talked about facilities on board, we'd pull out the Nerona drawings and start to think, well, if we got a ship similar to this, of course not the Nerona, but something similar to this, and it looked like this, then we could do that and that and this. And after a while, of course, there begins to grow in one's heart, perhaps this could be the vessel. And this was certainly happening in my heart. Around about early December, I began to ask myself the question, maybe this is the ship. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe the Nerona really is the ship that God has for us. And then on the 23rd of December, just 2 days before Christmas, obviously you kind of remember these things, we got an email message from Smirl Line, the owner of the Nerona. And they wrote to us and said, the Nerona has been sold. They've signed an agreement with another company. The ship is sold. Thank you for your interest, but just wanted you to know it's not available anymore. When we got that message, I remember we were in the container. That was the little office that we had for the project team out in the garden. When we got that message, I turned to Johannes, and Johannes turned to me, and he saw the disappointment on my face, and I saw the disappointment on his face. We felt very sad, and we thought it was a mixture of emotions. Well, yes, now this shows us that this is not God's ship because it's sold, and so any thoughts or wishes that we might have had obviously have been put to rest now. God has confirmed it's not the ship for us. We need to keep looking for other vessels. But somehow we were disappointed that we had missed an opportunity, and but we're grown-up boys, so we learned to work with our emotions and moved on. after Christmas and New Year, something very interesting happened, very exciting. You see, the Nerona, the reason it was being sold is because Smyrna Line had built another bigger ship, also called the Nerona. And that bigger ship was sailing between Denmark and the Faroe Islands. One day, early in January, or maybe mid-January, that ship had an accident. Yeah, basically damaged the side of the vessel and the propeller gear, and they had to take the new Nerona out of service, take it to a shipyard for repairs. While they did that, they took the old Nerona out of mothballs, so to speak, and brought it back into service. We were very excited about that. First of all, they told us that the previous contract had fallen through. And so it wasn't being sold anymore, that the people who wanted to buy the ship couldn't put down the down payment, so the ship was back on the market. And then we actually could see, obviously, that the ship was sailing. It wasn't just sitting there in the harbor, but it actually was in service. It was steaming between Denmark and the Faroe Islands. It was in class. We were most excited about that. And so we began to turn our thoughts again to the Nerona. Could this be the ship for us? And then I think it was toward the end of January, Mark Diamond and Peter and Birgitta Conlon, we asked them to go and visit the ship again for us and just gather some information. So they went up to Denmark and visited the ship. You could only stay for a couple of hours, if I remember right, because of some delay in sailing. And I remember the report that they brought back, both Mark and Peter brought back a report that was inconclusive. Maybe this could be the ship for us, but maybe not. There were certainly concerns about the spaces and the equipment on board, but there was enough, I think there was enough interest that was generated from that visit to continue to encourage us to pursue the Nerona. So we did that. We started writing very frequently then to Smyrna Line, and we told them that we are interested in the Nerona. They, of course, wrote back and said, well, it's wonderful that you're interested in the Nerona. Do you want to buy the ship? We said, no. We are just interested to get more information. We were very cautious because it's a big step, of course, to buy a ship. And then in early March, we met together as a leadership team, and we made the decision together that we are going to pursue now, we're going to take steps toward purchasing the ship. That doesn't mean that we are going to purchase it. We're still very cautious and nervous, but we're going to take steps toward purchasing the ship. We're still praying, Lord, lead us to the right ship at the right time. The steps that we were going to take, there were basically 3 steps. One, that we were going to have another technical inspection. In other words, we're going to send up, people that are technically skilled to have a look at the machinery space and the actual operation of the vessel while it's still running. We wanted to see the ship in operation. Then we were going to send another team of other leaders, ministry leaders, that were going to look at the facilities, the accommodation and the community spaces, the ministry spaces on board. And then we were going to have a day of prayer to seek the Lord about whether this was the ship or not. We communicated, I think we did communicate to the whole OM world, and we certainly communicated to our other ships, the Doulos and Logos 2. The day of prayer was going to be the 29th of March, 2004. So everything was lined up for this. We're in contact again with Smyrna Line. We said we're sending up 2 teams of people to investigate again, to look at the vessel. They said, you're welcome. And then as we were approaching that day, 20th of March was the day that we were going to have the technical inspection. 24th of March, the day that we were going to have our ministry inspection. 29th of March, the day of prayer. On the 17th of March, we got news from Smyrna Line, the ship has been sold. We said, how can that be? You know that we're interested in the Nerona. How could you sell the ship? They said, well, of course you're interested, but there are a lot of other people that are interested too. It's on the market. We wanted to sell the ship. There's another company that now has agreed to purchase the ship. They've signed the documentation. We're sorry, but you're too late. The ship is sold. So then we had to ask ourselves the question, what do we do? And I remember Johannes again asked me, Lloyd, what do we do? I said, well, let's go forward with the inspection. We can learn something. Even just from an educational point of view, we can learn something more about the kind of ship that we want. So let's go forward. We also had people arriving from different parts of the world to take this inspection. So the team drove up from Mosbach to Denmark to get on board the Nerona. It was actually the last voyage that the ship was taking before it was going to be mothballed again or sold, and the new Nerona was coming back into service. That team was on board overnight and sailed around to Copenhagen, got off, everybody wrote a report, very positive report actually. And then on Wednesday, the 24th of March, I and a few others, Peter Maiden was also there, had an inspection around the Nerona. As we looked around the different spaces, it was clear that this really was the right kind of ship for us. It just seemed right that this was the ship. But it seemed wrong that it was sold. How could these two things come together? And Smyrna made it very clear again, even when we took that technical inspection and the other inspection, they said the ship is sold, you cannot make a bid, we are not going to stop the process, we are selling the ship to another company, it's an Egyptian company, they want to use the ship as a pilgrim ferry between Egypt and Saudi Arabia for the Hajj. So I'm sorry guys, thank you for your interest, but you're too late. So as we're walking around the ship, we are looking and praying and asking ourselves, what do we do? And I remember at lunchtime, we had our little sandwiches with us. We sat down in the officers' mess and just shared with each other some of our impressions and our feelings. And very cautiously, we're all sharing with each other, this conviction that somehow we believe this is God's ship. It's easy to say now, but at the time it was very difficult to say, the ship is sold, but I believe God's going to give it to us. I mean, that's just foolish talk, and nobody says that. We didn't say that, by the way. But you could tell in people's hearts there was this desire to say that God was going to give us the ship anyway. And certainly there was that longing in my heart to say that, because that morning I had read the passage that I was just read out to you about Pharaoh and the Egyptian army chasing the Israelites. And remembering that, of course, the ship was sold to this Egyptian company. So the passage goes on. Let me read it out to you. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." And Moses answered the people, and this is what I read out at lunchtime as we're having our little sandwiches. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." And of course, reading out these words, it obviously had relevance to us. But how was God going to do that? I mean, it was absolutely impossible. Smyrna didn't want to talk to us. The ship was sold. The papers had been signed. We're sitting there on the Nerona reading these verses and thinking somehow God's going to do it. How was God going to do that? I mean, have we totally missed the plot altogether? So we continued our inspection, and we prayed, of course, "Lord, somehow we believe this is the right ship, but it's impossible. You work it out for us." The kind of prayer that we would all pray, but in your heart you're wondering, it's just wishful thinking. Where is that line between presumption and faith? I'm still learning that lesson. But we prayed, "Lord, continue to lead us to the right ship at the right time." That little team dispersed. We went to different places, and I stayed behind for another day. And then on Friday, the 26th of March, I took the train back from Copenhagen to Mosbach. I was on the train with Graham Jack. So we're about 1 hour out of Copenhagen on this train. And all of a sudden, we get a phone call. And it's Bitten Shriver, the leader of OM's work in Denmark at the time. She phones and says, "Lloyd, you've got to contact Smyrna Line." I said, "Why?" She said, I don't know, but somebody in the company has just phoned me and said something's happening today. So I contacted Smyrna Line, and they told us that indeed something was happening today. On the 26th of March, that was the last day in which this Egyptian company had to put down their down payment before the contract would be void again. And they told us that if you want to buy the ship, you must bid. The time for interest is over. If you want the ship, you must make a bid. But you can't make a bid yet because this company may still make their down payment. If they haven't made the down payment by 6 o'clock that evening, we're putting it on the market again. So I'm traveling by train, and I'm talking to Bitten. I mean, what I just told you took place over a few hours. I'm talking to Bitten, I'm talking to Smyrna Line, I'm talking to Bernd Golke down in Mosbach. He's talking to Smyrna Line and talking to Bitten, and there's just all conversations going around, and about halfway down, Ben and I are talking about what will we bid for the ship. So, we bid, 3 million, 4 million euros. And the people on the train are just fascinated by this conversation, Every time my phone rings, everybody turns. They want to hear the next chapter to this incredible story that's evolving before them. So I get back to Mosbach at 5:30 in the afternoon and go to Bernd's office. And we wait until 6 o'clock. At 6:01, we phone to Smyrna Line, and they tell us the ship's for sale again. There are already 2 other bids. One for 3.55 million euros and another bid for 3.6 million euros. What do you want to bid? Do you want to buy the ship? So we said, just a minute. And we put the phone down and, of course, had a quick prayer and discussion. And Bernd said, well, what should we offer? Should we offer 3.7? I said, no, Bernd, let's just offer 3.6. Let's just match the highest bid and trust the Lord that, we can work this out. So that's what we did. We phoned back and we said, we'd like to offer 3.6 million euros. But we can't, obviously it's the end of the day, we can't do much anymore. And they said, that's all right. We're having a special board meeting tomorrow, and we'd like to talk to you again about this bid, and we'd like you to make your bid tomorrow with the board. We said, okay. That evening we called together. Of course, this all was happening very quickly. So we called together anybody that we could find in Mosbach, and actually a number of people were there because we were getting ready for our day of prayer on the 29th of March. This was the evening of the 26th of March that we were talking to Smyrna Line. The next day, we got people together, we talked and we prayed, Lord, just confirm if this is the right thing. The next day, Saturday, many of us were at a wedding. There was a wedding happening that morning, and right after the wedding, we called to Smyrna Line. They had all their directors there, we can imagine, in this room, and they had a conference call with us. And they began to ask us, well, do you want to buy the ship? And we said, we intend to buy the ship. Our bid is 3.6 million euros. And they said to us, well, it's wonderful that you intend to buy the ship, but will you buy the ship? And after a number of, back and forward bit of discussion, it came down to this question. They were very direct with it. Will you buy the ship? And we obviously had to give an answer, but it was a difficult answer because we wanted to have our day of prayer on the 29th before making any. So we said to them, look, we intend to buy the ship, but we need to meet with our ultimate decision maker on Monday, 29th of March, before we can make a final bid. They said, well, who is that? Well, we said, it's God, the Lord. We need to meet with the Lord on Monday, and then we can give you an answer. Well, then there was silence on the phone. It was one of those silences that just goes on and on and on. You wonder, is anybody still there? Hello? And they said, yes, we're still here, just a minute. So they put us on mute. And later on, we heard what happened. That the board, of course, was shocked. They'd never been in any negotiation to sell a ship with people that wanted to talk to God about whether we buy it or not. And there was some debate in the board about whether they could treat this as a serious bid or not, or whether this was just some crazy hoax. But the chairman of the board, who actually I couldn't say that he walks closely with the Lord, but he has a Christian heritage and a background. The chairman of the board said, look, we have nothing really to lose by waiting until Monday. We've got these two other companies that are firm bids. We can wait until Monday evening and let's listen to what happens. And if they do give us a bid by 6 o'clock on Monday, 3.6 million, we'll accept that. If not, then we've got these other companies. So they of course, took us off moot, and they said to us, okay, you can have your day on Monday to meet with your ultimate decision maker. But we want a firm answer from you by 6 o'clock Monday afternoon. So we were relieved by that because we really believed, we knew that we had to have that day with the Lord, that day of prayer. And it wasn't just those of us that were in Mosbach, it was also on board the ships, Doulos and Logos 2 and elsewhere in the world. People praying everywhere, for God to confirm, is this the right ship for us and is now the right time? I look back and I see when Johannes and I visited the ship in August 2003, it wasn't the right time. God had to do other things in our ministry, in our life, to prepare us for the right time. But it was the right ship. And on this day, 29th of March, Mark led us in a time of prayer and worship at before sunrise, up on a hill overlooking the office. And it was just such a wonderful day. I probably have never had such a day of seeking the Lord like that. There wasn't, my memory, my experience anyway, no anxiety, no worry, no sense of uncertainty. It was just an incredible peace and assurance, contentment. It was just an amazing experience of just knowing this was right. This was the ship, and now was the time. And so, and we actually didn't pray a lot about to God, is this a ship or not? We prayed about many other things. And just getting ourselves right with the Lord again, making sure that, we are, as a ministry, staying in alignment with God's will. And then at the end of the day, or toward the middle of the afternoon, we met together again, and everyone that was there just shared, how the Lord had been speaking with them. And there was an overwhelming sense that this really was the ship. And so we prayed, and then we pulled out the contract, and by faith, we signed that contract. And then we faxed it to Smyrna Line at 5:30 in the afternoon, and phoned them, and we said, did you get it? And they said, yes, we got it. Is this real? We said, yes, it's real. We want to buy the ship, and we have signed this contract. We want to go forward. So we were thrilled with that. It was a wonderful day of celebration. And actually, we decided to take over the vessel even before we physically or legally owned it. It took some weeks before we actually went through the process of transferring the money. We had a celebration on board the Nerona just a week later. And that's when the board members came and told us their side of the story. We had a wonderful time of celebration in the main dining room on the ship. And then on the 19th of April, we actually had the legal sale. Bernd and I and Bitten went across to the Faroe Islands. I was a little confused because when we met them in the bank, the Smyrna Line people were very nervous. I couldn't figure out why they're so nervous. We're totally excited. This is the day when we're going to take legal possession of the ship. But they were very nervous. And it was a long process. We spent all morning in the bank, but it ended up with two steps. One, our bank confirming that 3.6 million euros had left our bank account and was on its way to theirs. And then a few minutes later, their bank phoned and said they've just received 3.6 million euros from our bank. Well, when they said that, when that news came through the phone, they were happy. They were excited. I think right up until that last moment, they thought this was all going to fall. This is all going to be evaporate. It's not going to happen. But when it did happen, they were thrilled. And they weren't only thrilled, really, because they had sold the ship. In their hearts, and they told us this as well, in their hearts they were thrilled that they had sold it to us. Somehow they, in their lives, and certainly two of the directors are walking very closely with the Lord, they were just so thrilled that God had chosen their company and this ship to come into the Lord's service. And that was just one this is just one story of this incredible adventure of faith that the Lord has led us on with the Logos Hope. You're going to go on board in a short time and be on board God's ship, and it really is God's ship. For me, I needed to have that experience because soon after that, we encountered many setbacks in the project, as you no doubt have heard. And many times I had to remember this story because in remembering, I had confidence that this is God's ship. This is his project. He had brought that miraculously. It wasn't the efforts of man. Twice it was sold. God he kept that ship in his hand, and in a way that we could never imagine, he made it possible. And that's just been an incredible encouragement to me in the midst of many setbacks. And I think it will always be an encouragement to me in whatever I do in my life. If you can understand what I'm saying, I saw God at work. I experienced God's miracle mercy, even in the nick of time, and that's just such a beautiful experience, and we need that. And I just want to finish with some verses from Hebrews chapter 10 because these have also been an encouragement to me and fit into this story. In Hebrews chapter 10, the writer is trying to encourage the Hebrew Christians not to give up. Don't be discouraged when things go bad, when you have setbacks. Don't fall away, but hold firm, to your confidence. God is with you. He is at work in your midst. He's at work in your life, and you just need to trust him. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but are those who believe and are saved. And faith is an incredible experience. I still am learning what it means to live by faith. But I'm so thankful that the Lord gives us these experiences in our life where we can see his faithfulness. Because that's really, for me anyway, it's one equation. My faith is always and every time met by God's faithfulness. And that is my encouragement and my strength.